So yeah, serious question for you all. How many of you have been sick in your lifetimes? If so, how sick were you? Was it serious? Did you have to go to the hospital because it was so bad? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then you have my condolences and I can emphasize with you. I myself have been blessed with a very strong immune system. I hardly ever get sick, and when I do go to the hospital, it's just for a routine physical and to get my flu shot. But with us currently being in the midst of a pandemic, one is bound to end up catching the virus sooner or later. Even if you're vaccinated, from what I've heard. And, well, I was no different. So my experience began around the beginning of November last year. I went to work on a Thursday and I noticed that I was feeling a little sniffly and I had a bad cough, which, while common flu symptoms, are also symptoms for COVID 19. So my supervisor sent me to get tested and go home as I waited for the results. And when I got tested, I got the deal where they stick a Q-tip up your nose and twirl it around. And let me tell you, that is super unpleasant. It's not nice. Anyways, a day later, I got an email from my local hospital telling me that fortunately I had tested negative for COVID. I just contracted a head cold that had been going around at the time. Now I know what you're thinking. Rezik, head colds aren't that serious at all. How could that have been the worst sickness you've ever experienced? And you know what? You're right. A head cold itself isn't that big of a deal. But that's not the worst of what I'd gotten. Oh no. That was merely a prelude of what was to come. Because not long after getting over my head cold, I started showing symptoms again. So I got tested again, and it was just... Anyways, Monday rolls around, and I am ready to go back to work. But I look at my test results, and lo and behold, it was positive. I had finally contracted COVID 19. The local hospital, where I work by the way, and no, I'm not a doctor before you ask, called me and told me that I had to quarantine for the next 10 days, so that I didn't spread the disease to anyone in my workstation. And you know what? Fair enough. I don't want my coworkers getting sick because of me. So I did the quarantine. My COVID experience wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, and my symptoms were actually pretty mild in comparison to what most other people experienced. I had a low fever, and my nose was kind of running and stuffed up. But the thing that I had the biggest problem with was a loss of appetite. I couldn't really eat much of anything during this time. In fact, just the mere thought of eating anything made me feel... Well, I wouldn't call it nauseous, but my stomach was definitely saying no to food. At the most, I was able to eat crackers and drink ginger ale and water. But when I drank water, it seemed to always have a funny aftertaste. And I do remember napping often during my quarantine, as the disease made me feel drowsy. And I'll admit, the virus had me worried. I was worried that things would get worse, and that I might end up even worse than I was already feeling. Oh boy. If only I'd realized that those worries were not unfounded. After my quarantine, I was feeling a lot better. My fever broke, I wasn't sniffly anymore, I was ready to go back to work, and I did. But it was on a Friday, so I only had to work for one day that week. Yay for me! But then Sunday evening rolls around, and I noticed that my back was starting to ache. And it was a very noticeable ache, too. I felt like Eustace from Courage the Cowardly Dog after he got that kangaroo monster bone hammered into his spinal column. But at that point, it was bearable at least, and I remember thinking to myself, oof, why does my back hurt so much? My parents thought that I must have pulled a muscle in my back, since I had been coughing a lot during my quarantine, and I accepted that theory and just went about my evening like I usually do. A few hours later, it was time for me to go to bed so I'd be ready to go back to work on Monday. But as soon as I lay down on my back, the pain intensified. Well, that's certainly not normal. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say it was an 11 on that scale. I tried to stay on my side to sleep, I really did, but I'm not typically a side sleeper, so I kept unintentionally rolling onto my back and causing myself the worst back pains I'd ever felt in my life. I stayed up in bed until about 1 a.m. until I was finally able to conk out for about 5.5 hours. I knew that I should have gone straight to urgent care as soon as I got to the hospital. But I was being stubborn and tried to ride out the pain, thinking that it would just go away if I ignored it. Boy, was I wrong! About 45 minutes to an hour of sitting in my office in pain and getting hardly anything done, I finally decided that it was time to get some help. So, I went to tell my supervisor that I'd be going to urgent care because my back was absolutely killing me. I went to the office and made an appointment to be seen that day. But the wait was very long and uncomfortable, since the pain in my back seemed to be getting worse as time went on. It was getting to a point where I wanted to cry. And I'm not talking like, oh, boo-hoo, you're a wimpy man who's about to cry. It was just, yep, time to cry. Let out rip tears. Finally, a doctor calls me in, and I hobble to the exam room. They put me through some basic tests before taking me to a specialist to get some blood drawn, and then the doctor takes me to orthopedics to get an x-ray. And it was at that moment I learned what was causing me so much pain. I had COVID-related pneumonia and blood clots that traveled up into my lungs. Never in my life had I ever thought that I would develop something like blood clots, let alone pneumonia, but that did explain why the pain was so bad. I was wheeled around in a wheelchair and had to get an MRI to see how bad it was. And after I was taken to the ER for a few more tests, at first it looked like I was going to have to be transferred to another hospital since they didn't have enough beds at the time. But after leaving me alone for a while to see if my breathing was okay, they decided that I could go home to rest up. My mom and my brother drove me home from the hospital, and when I got home, she was very worried about my health. Well, my whole family was, honestly, though some showed it more so than others. And since I couldn't lay down to sleep, I had to sleep upright in a chair, which really hurt my tailbone. My mom slept in the living room with me to make sure that whenever I woke up, which was usually in 4-hour intervals or so, I could take some painkillers to help ease the pain in my back. My dad had also picked up some blood thinners that the ER doctors prescribed me to help with the blood clots. To say that this was a hard time for me would be a drastic understatement. I was tired, I was constantly in pain, sometimes to the point where I was taking shallow breaths just to get some oxygen into my lungs. And I only had enough motor functions to drink water and go to the bathroom. And even then, I was constantly stopping every few steps and needed to lean against my mom's back as I slowly hobbled my way to the bathroom. Honestly, I just felt so weak, and I remember thinking to myself, wow, I didn't even know that I could feel this weak. And I knew that I needed to eat in order to help my body heal through the nutrients that the food would give it, but my body was just not having it. I still felt like my stomach would do backflips if I tried to eat anything. Really, the most I could eat at the time was a few grapes or a couple of small bites of an apple. Sometimes I felt like I could eat a few potato chips, but other than that, I really couldn't eat much of anything for the better part of a week and a half. But after the first week, or week and a half, I don't remember how long it was exactly, my mom suggested that I try to lay down on the couch to sleep. But we were going to take it slow and have my back propped up by a bunch of pillows. So, with that in mind, I decided to give it a try. Night came, and Mom and I settled down for bed. Mom had been sleeping on the floor using a plush blanket to try and soften it a bit, which I still felt bad about because I don't like making my mom uncomfortable like that. But she told me that it was fine and that mommies take care of their kids. She was really looking out for me throughout this whole thing. Thanks, Mom. Anyway, I lifted my legs up and set them on the couch under my blanket. And no pain was happening. So far, so good. I leaned back with the pillows providing support for my back. I had almost no pain as far as I managed to fall asleep pretty quickly, and only woke up once during the night. But that was because my mom and dad's cat had curled up and fell asleep on my lap and was causing me some pain. But hey, progress! After that, I decided to try and sleep in my own bed from then on. But I kept a big pillow to prop myself up against so I could sleep without pain. And after that day, there was a considerable drop in pain. Mom and I scheduled a follow-up appointment with my doctor, who we'll call Dr. Bega. And even though I still had to be wheeled around in a wheelchair because I was still experiencing shortness of breath, I felt a lot better than I did at the beginning of this whole debacle. Dr. Bega ran some standard tests like checking my breathing and blood pressure, asking if I was feeling pain and where, and the like. After that, we scheduled a second follow-up appointment for the next week, Another good thing that happened was that I was finally getting my appetite back, and I was able to eat a whole meal at breakfast for the first time in a long time, and enjoy a cup of coffee. Oh, the feeling of finally getting a full meal into my belly instead of having nausea was just amazing, and I felt sweet satisfaction. As the week progressed, I found myself getting stronger and stronger until my last follow-up appointment. I was declared healthy enough to go and cleared to go back to work at long last, and I was so happy because I felt like I was burdening my coworkers with not being able to come to work at all that time. I mean, I know I was on medical leave at the time, but I still felt bad that my coworkers had to pick up the slack for me. Overall, I'm glad I'm well, uh, and I'm glad that my family was there for me in my time of need. I would not wish that kind of pain on anyone, not even my worst enemies. Well, everyone, I hope you all enjoyed that story. I know that it's not exactly the most exciting story that one could ask for, and quite frankly, I don't know how I got blood clots in the first place. All my mom, the doctors, and I could figure was that they must have formed in my legs due to the inactivity caught because of my COVID sickness, since I wasn't moving as much as I usually did because of it. And then they broke once I was well enough to actually start moving again and traveled through my bloodstream and into my lungs. Quite frankly, that sounds like the most logical explanation to me. But anyways, everyone, I hope that you are all staying safe and continuing to do the 5 things as we continue to fight our way through this pandemic. I don't want anyone to get sick because they made a stupid choice during a pandemic. Which is this one. But anyways, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like it and share it around, and if you're new, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you so desire, and don't forget to click that notification bell so that you never miss a video. And until next time, this has been Rezik the Time Patrol Elite. Keep on patrolling.